the truth was hidden beneath the ordinary glow of a diner forgotten by time.
For Daniel Cortez, it was nothing more than another forced stop, an inconvenient setback in his busy millionaire schedule. But behind the faded counter, between the smell of burnt coffee and reheated apple pie, he was about to rediscover a part of himself and with it, the childhood friend who once showed him it was possible to dream. What began as a simple detour would become the most unexpected turning point of his life. The clock had just passed 8 in the morning when the sandstorm finally forced him off the main road. His luxury car wasn't built for the New Mexico desert, nor for swallowing the red dust that seemed to seep into every crevice of the vehicle. Daniel killed the engine, cursed under his breath, and took a deep breath. He was on his way to Santa Fe, where a group of investors awaited him for a meeting that could seal yet another expansion of his tech empire. Nothing could go wrong that morning, and yet, everything felt out of place. That's when he saw the sign glowing in hesitant neon, Luna's Cafe. The flickering letters seemed to fight against time itself, each dim bulb betraying years of neglect. There was no other sign of civilization nearby. Only the dust-covered road and a few abandoned buildings. Reluctantly, Daniel opened his car door and walked toward the diner. The storm's roar was beginning to fade, but the sand-laden air still scratched his throat. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as he stepped inside. The place was a nostalgic portrait of decades gone by, wooden tables carved with couples' initials, cracked leather booths, black and white photos of local baseball games. The jukebox, surprisingly intact, still displayed chrome buttons and dusty records, as if waiting for someone brave enough to bring the music back. The air smelled of strong coffee, frying bacon, and reheated apple pie. Daniel straightened his jacket, feeling out of place there. He was used to glass towers, sleek cafes, and executives in pressed suits. In that modest space, surrounded by truckers, farmhands, and traveling families, he felt like a stranger dropped from another planet. He slid into a booth at the back, seeking a little discretion. When he reached for his phone to check his messages, he realized there was no signal.
The irony almost made him laugh. The man who oversaw fiber optic networks and invested in satellites couldn't even send an email in Silver Creek.
That's when a voice interrupted his thoughts.
"Good morning. Can I get you started with some coffee?" He looked up. And, for an instant, the world stopped.
Clara gripped her order pad tightly, as if that small piece of paper were an anchor. Her eyes, now locked on Daniel, flickered between surprise and disbelief.
"So, it really is you. Daniel Cortez."
Her voice came out as a whisper, but carried the weight only years could bring. He forced a small smile.
"The same. Just a little older, and maybe more tired." Clara let out a brief laugh, but quickly looked away.
Her apron was stained with coffee, and she brushed at the fabric as if trying to erase what would never come out.
"I never thought I'd see you again."
And here, of all places, at Luna's.
Daniel adjusted himself in the booth. Life has its ironies. For a moment, the silence between them felt like an abyss.
He studied her in detail, the fine lines around her eyes, the way she bit the corner of her lip before speaking, exactly as she used to when trying to solve a difficult equation at school. And suddenly, flashes of memory rushed back. 2 children sitting on the curb, a blue-covered notebook balanced on their knees, Clara patiently explaining how to simplify fractions while he pretended not to understand, just to hear her voice a little longer. "You still make that face," she said, breaking the silence.
"What face?"
"That one, the serious look of concentration.
As if the world depended on solving the problem on the chalkboard."
Daniel chuckled softly.
"Maybe it still does."
Clara shook her head, but there was tenderness in her eyes.
Tenderness mixed with something else, a shadow too hard to hide.
The bell from the kitchen rang, and she startled.
"Sorry, I have to deliver an order." "But, don't go anywhere."
She hurried off, balancing 2 steaming cups. Daniel followed her with his eyes, noticing the familiarity with which she greeted regular customers, the quickness of her movements, the automatic smile that returned to her face whenever someone spoke to her. Yet there were moments when the smile faded halfway, when she thought no one was watching.
Daniel drew a deep breath.
It was like staring at a torn photograph of an old dream. The girl who once believed in him was still there.
But what had life done to Clara Mendoza?
If this story has already caught your attention, take a moment to leave a like right now.
That way, you help me keep bringing you emotional stories like this one. Clara returned to Daniel's table a few minutes later, balancing a coffee pot.
The smile was still on her face, but her eyes revealed a weariness no mask could conceal. She filled his cup and, without asking, sat across from him for a moment. "So, Daniel Cortez back in Silver Creek." Her voice carried a hint of irony, but tenderness was hidden beneath it.
"I bet you never imagined coming back here." "To be honest, no."
He held the mug with both hands, as if the warmth of the coffee could ground him.
"But I guess some unexpected stops have a purpose." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You speak as if you believe in destiny." Daniel gave a half-smile. "Let's just say I believe in reunions."
The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken memories. He wanted to ask more about her life, but before he could, the doorbell chimed again. A man walked in, worn cap pulled low, eyes restless.
Clara stiffened instantly. Daniel noticed.
The man strode straight to the counter, tapping his fingers nervously.
Clara stood at once, shoulders tense, voice too firm to be natural. "I'll be right there, Miguel." "Wait a second." Daniel caught the detail, Miguel. The name sounded familiar, not just because it was common.
It was Clara's younger brother, the rebellious boy who was always getting into trouble in the neighborhood when they were kids. Clara disappeared behind the counter with him, but their body language spoke louder than words. Daniel watched the brusque gestures, the way she pulled a folded bill from her apron and slipped it discreetly into the man's hand. He took it, muttered something, and left without even looking back. She returned moments later, pretending everything was normal, but Daniel noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she held the coffee pot.
"Your brother?" he asked, his voice low. Clara hesitated just a second too long before replying. "Family." She forced a smile. "Family isn't something we get to choose, is it?" Daniel simply watched her. He didn't need more details to know there was a bigger story hidden there, one Clara wasn't ready to reveal just yet. But he had already decided, he wasn't leaving that diner without finding out. Clara adjusted the order pad on the table, but instead of writing, she just spun it between her fingers, as if searching for courage. Her gaze wandered over Daniel's face, trying to reconcile the image of the impeccably dressed man with the skinny boy who once walked beside her through the streets of Silver Creek. "It's still hard to believe," she murmured. "Daniel Cortez, here, sitting at my table." He smiled, leaning forward. "The same table where we used to do history homework, remember? I copied half your answers." She laughed, and this time the laughter sounded more genuine. "And I only let you because I needed your help with math. If it weren't for you, I would have failed the year." Daniel paused. "Funny. I thought the exact opposite. That if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere." For a moment, silence wrapped around them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but a plunge into memories that felt too alive to have been kept away for so long. A flash crossed Daniel's mind, the two of them sitting on the low roof of Clara's building, staring at the stars. He remembered her saying she wanted to travel the world, open an art studio, teach children how to draw. He, on the other hand, dreamed of working with computers, inventing things that seemed impossible. Neither of them had the money to imagine such dreams, but together they made a silent pact, never to give up. He cleared his throat, trying to push the memory aside. "Do you still draw?" Her smile faded for a second, too quickly for anyone not paying close attention. "It's been a long time," she replied. Life happened." Daniel caught the evasiveness, but didn't press. Clara got up to serve another table, and Daniel's eyes followed her. He noticed the way she balanced the tray on just one arm, as if the other hurt. He also caught the way she disguised a faint limp whenever she walked faster. Small signs, almost invisible, but to him they screamed. When she returned, he was already waiting with another question. "And our friends from school? Do you keep in touch with anyone?" Clara shook her head. "Most of them left. Some went to Albuquerque, others to bigger cities. I stayed." She stopped, quickly correcting herself, by choice, of course. Daniel raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He remembered how Clara was always the first to talk about leaving town. Hearing her now say she stayed by choice sounded like a poorly rehearsed lie. "And you?" she asked, maybe to change the subject. "I imagine you've gone much farther than that boy who dreamed of fixing computers." He smirked. "Let's just say computers ended up taking me farther than I ever imagined." Clara pressed her lips together, studying him carefully. "You're not going to tell me just how far, are you?" Daniel shrugged, taking a sip of coffee. "Maybe later. I want to hear more about you." She chuckled, but her eyes shifted away. "There's nothing interesting about me." Daniel didn't answer, but inside he felt the opposite. There was plenty of interesting, and plenty left unsaid. An older customer stood and cracked a joke at Clara, who laughed mechanically. But as soon as she turned her back, her face slipped back into that same weary expression. Daniel caught the change like someone noticing a key piece in a puzzle. He leaned his arms on the table, leaning forward, watching her in silence. Every gesture, every silence from Clara was a muffled cry. And Daniel knew that, sooner or later, she would talk. Daniel's eyes stayed on Clara, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he kept in his memory. As he watched her clear plates from another table, a memory took hold of him with almost physical force, as if time itself had folded over. He was 12 again, sitting on the low rooftop of Clara's building on a summer night in Silver Creek. The heat was stifling, but up there a breeze offered some relief. The sky was sprinkled with stars, and Clara, lying on her back, pointed at constellations with an enthusiasm bigger than the world itself. "You know, Daniel," she said, with the conviction of someone who believes in the impossible, "one day I'll travel. I'll paint the streets of Paris, I'll see New York from the top of a skyscraper. I'll have a studio full of children learning to draw with me." Daniel laughed, his face still smudged with dust from the street. "And I'll be the guy who fixes every computer in the world." Clara turned her head toward him, squinting. "No, you'll invent things. You've always been good at that. You don't realize it, but you're smart in a different way." He blushed, eyes shifting back to the sky. "And if I fail?" She sat up, her knees scraped from the rough rooftop, and looked straight into his eyes. "Then we fail together. But we never give up. Got it?" Daniel nodded slowly, swallowing the promise as if it were sacred. In that instant, they made a silent pact, sealed not with formal words but with a firm, awkward handshake between two children who believed the world could be bigger than Silver Creek. Back in the present, Daniel felt a knot in his throat. He remembered the weight of those words. We never give up. And yet, looking at Clara now, with her worn apron and tired smile, he had the unsettling sense that she had given up on herself somewhere along the way. Clara returned to the table with a slice of apple pie balanced in her hand. She set it down in front of Daniel without him even ordering. On the house. Still the same recipe from Mrs. Luna. She brushed back a loose strand of hair that had slipped from her bun. Daniel stared at the plate, then back at her. You still remember I never turned down dessert. She smirked. You always said sugar was fuel for thinking. The comment triggered another memory. Daniel saw himself as a teenager, sitting on the park bench with Clara, sharing a can of cheap soda. He sketched computer diagrams in a notebook while she drew people passing by on the street. He talked about inventions. She talked about colors. And between sips of soda and bites of cake, they planned a future that seemed impossible. Back in the present, Daniel took a deep breath. And your drawings? Do you still have that blue notebook? Clara froze for a moment, then answered too quickly. I think it got lost in the moves. She shifted her gaze toward the counter. Daniel noticed the discomfort. Moves. He knew Clara hadn't had many moves. The town was the same, the diner was the same. The only real change was the invisible weight on her shoulders. You talk as if it were yesterday, she said, trying to bring back some lightness. But more than 20 years have passed. And still, it feels like nothing has changed. Daniel replied without thinking. Clara shot him a quick look, almost offended, but quickly masked it. Some things do change. She murmured, almost to herself. The silence returned. But now it wasn't the comfortable silence of old friends. It was the heavy silence of something hidden. Daniel decided to break it. Do you still have that dream? Which one? She asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. The studio. The kids. The travels. Clara pressed her lips together. For a second, it seemed like she might laugh. But what came out was a sigh. Dreams don't pay the bills, Daniel. The words hit him like a punch. Clara had never spoken like that. The Clara he knew always said dreams were the only thing that kept us alive. He leaned back in his seat, studying her face. Wasn't it you who taught me never to give up? She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. We said a lot of things when we were kids. Daniel stayed quiet, but inside something stirred. He knew that answer wasn't the truth. This wasn't about giving up. This was about surviving. As he watched Clara return to the counter to serve another customer, he noticed something even more unsettling. When no one was looking, her smile simply vanished. Like a mask falling. And in her eyes, there was something he had never seen before: fear. The movement inside Luna's cafe slowed as the morning wore on. Most of the truckers had gone back to the road, and only a handful of customers. The cafe was quieter now, only a few customers scattered in the booths. The silence made it impossible for Clara to keep avoiding the conversation she had been putting off. She returned to Daniel's table, carrying a mug of coffee for herself. This time, she didn't stay standing. She pulled the seat across from him and sat down slowly, as if tired of always being on her feet. The order pad was still in her hand, but she set it down on the table, wrapping her fingers around the mug. You were always good at noticing things, Daniel, she said, not meeting his eyes. I bet you've already realized my life didn't exactly turn out the way I planned. He leaned forward, gaze steady. I realized you're hiding something. But I'll only understand if you tell me. Clara let out a humorless laugh. Do you really think you want to know? I don't even like thinking about it myself. If it's about you, then yes, I want to know, he answered, his calm conviction making her bite her lip, hesitant. There was silence. She turned the mug in her hands, watching the coffee swirl as if searching for answers in its dark depths. Finally, she drew a long breath. After we finished school, I got a scholarship to study in Albuquerque. Remember? I was so excited. Her voice faltered for a moment, and Daniel caught the glimmer of both pride and pain. I thought it was my ticket out of here. She paused, clutching the mug tighter. But in my second year, my mother got sick. Cancer. And suddenly, it didn't matter what I dreamed of. I dropped everything and came back to take care of her. Daniel said nothing. He just let her go on. Those years were hard. Clara swallowed. She fought as long as she could, but, when she was gone, the bills were already piled up on the table. I could never go back to college. There was no money, no energy. And someone had to stay with Miguel. Her brother's name came out almost like a burden, and Daniel understood immediately. He was always restless. Restless is a kind way to put it. Clara exhaled bitterly. Miguel never knew how to live within limits. He got involved with the wrong people, racked up debts he couldn't pay. I ended up carrying it all. She lifted her eyes, and behind the weariness there was a spark of wounded pride. Not because I wanted to, but because I was the only one left. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his throat. The memory of the girl who wanted to paint the world didn't fit with the woman who now spoke like someone crushed by circumstance. "So you stayed here?" he murmured. She nodded, a sad half-smile on her lips. "I stayed. Worked anywhere that would take me, supermarket, bakery, even a gas station. But none of those jobs lasted. The only one that gave me any stability was this." She glanced around Luna's cafe, like someone staring at a prison disguised as home. "It's not glamour, it's not a dream, but it pays the bills." Daniel wanted to protest, to say it wasn't fair. But she raised her hand before he could speak. "I'm not telling you this for pity," she said firmly. "It's just the truth. I made choices. Some out of love, others out of desperation. But every one of them brought me here." He held her gaze for a long moment, absorbing every word. "But you didn't give up, Clara," he said at last, his voice heavy with intensity. "You sacrificed. That's different." She gave a short, tired laugh. "Funny to hear that from you, sitting there in your expensive suit with that look of someone who conquered the world. To me, it all feels the same. Giving up. Sacrificing. In the end, this is the result." She opened her arms, pointing at the cafe around them. A small place, and an even smaller life. Daniel leaned his elbows on the table, closing the distance between them. "You taught me, when we were kids, that we never give up. That no matter how many times life knocks us down, we always find a way to get back up." Her eyes welled with unshed tears. Clara turned her face away, as if she didn't want him to see. "Sometimes, Daniel, life doesn't let you get back up." No, his voice was sharp, unwavering. "Life can knock you down, but it can't stop you. You're not what happened to you, Clara. You're who you've always been." She took a deep breath but didn't answer. She just sat there in silence, staring into her coffee mug as if searching for strength she couldn't find within herself. And Daniel, watching her, knew in that instant that no matter the cost, he wouldn't leave without finding a way to give Clara back the dreams she believed she had lost. Clara still turned the mug slowly in her hands, silent, as if each word spoken had reopened an old wound. Daniel studied her, feeling the weight hanging between them. Then he drew in a breath and, instead of pushing further, let a smile play at the corner of his lips. "You know what I just remembered?" he asked, a playful glint in his eyes. Clara raised her brows, surprised by the sudden change of tone. "What?" "The school science fair." He leaned forward, suddenly animated. "The one where you presented a poster about the solar system, and he paused dramatically, tried to build a robot out of scrap metal." Clara's eyes widened, and for the first time that morning, she let out a genuine burst of laughter. "Robomax," she said, nearly breathless. "How could I ever forget? It would take 3 steps and fall flat on its face." "Hey, it wasn't that bad," Daniel protested, laughing along. "At least the chest light turned on." "Only after you kicked it, Daniel." She shot back, covering her mouth to hold back more laughter. Their laughter rang through the cafe, drawing curious glances from the few customers left. For a moment, it felt like the years of heaviness had lifted, and before him was the lively girl he remembered. "And remember when the teacher said our team had the greatest potential?" Clara's smile lit up her eyes. "I was so full of myself." "You were right," Daniel answered, more serious now. "We both had potential. And you still do." She looked away, though her smile lingered, softer this time. You always knew how to make me laugh when I least expected it.
And I'd do it 1,000 times again if I had to. He held her gaze.
Because you deserve to remember who you really are. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore.
It was soft, full of unspoken understanding. Clara sighed, her shoulders finally relaxing. You haven't changed as much as I thought.
Daniel smiled.
I just learned to wear better suits. They laughed together again, and in that instant, Daniel felt he had managed to pry open a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Clara still wore a smile, her recent laughter echoing as if it had cleared the heavy air for a while. But as the silence returned, Daniel noticed how her fingers twisted the napkin, tearing it into small pieces without even realizing it.
He placed his hand calmly on the table. You know, I never saw you as someone who gave up easily. She lifted her eyes, and for a second, the sparkle of laughter was still there. But it quickly faded, replaced by something darker. We don't always get to choose our battles, Daniel. She murmured. He waited. Didn't press, just left the space open. Clara drew a long breath, leaning back against the booth. I told you about my mother, about Miguel, but I didn't tell you everything. Daniel felt a chill in his chest. Then tell me. She turned her gaze toward the window, staring out at the desert as if trying to draw courage from its vastness. After my mother died and Miguel started giving me trouble, I was exhausted. Her voice faltered. I thought I needed someone to share the weight. And that's when I met Javier. The name came out harsh, bitter on her tongue. He seemed like the right kind of man, she went on. Had a job, spoke gently, said he would protect me. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to believe that I ignored all the signs. Daniel kept silent, but every muscle in his body tensed. At first it was just control. Little things. Questions about where I went, who I talked to. Then came the criticism, the shouting, the hidden debts. Clara ran her hand over her arm, as if she could still feel the echoes of it. When I finally found out, it wasn't just money lost in cards and bets. He was taking everything, even what I had saved for rent. She closed her eyes for a moment, and Daniel saw her struggle to hold back tears. In the end, one day he just left. Took what little was left and left me with nothing but debts in my name. Her voice cracked, but quickly steadied. 2 years ago. Since then, it's just been this. The cafe. The tables. The routine. Daniel felt anger boil inside him, but he kept his words restrained. Everything in him screamed to protect her, to pull her out of this place, but he knew this wasn't the moment for reckless promises. Clara drew in a breath, as though closing a wound she had finally revealed to someone for the first time. And that's why, Daniel, I say sometimes life doesn't let you get back up. Not because I don't want to. But because every time I try, it feels like someone pulls me right back down. At last she looked him in the eyes. No more masks, no forced smiles. Only truth, raw, bare, painful. Daniel held her gaze, steady. Then maybe you just need someone to remind you that you can still get up. Clara blinked, surprised. And for a brief instant, he saw the girl again, the one who once believed they could conquer the world together. Clara stayed silent, staring at her mug as if the porcelain rim could hold the answers life had never given her. Across the table, Daniel felt every word of hers reverberate like a beat against his chest. He had always remembered her as the strongest one, the dreamer, the one who didn't accept limits. Seeing her now, piecing together her own fall, stirred in him a mix of sadness and determination. He wanted to reach for her hand but restrained himself. Instead, he found another way to reach that heart hardened by too many blows. Do you remember the pact we made on your rooftop? He asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Clara frowned. Pact? We swore we would never give up. You said that if one of us fell, the other would get back up with them.
He tilted his head. I took that seriously, Clara.
I always did.
She let out a weary sigh, but her eyes glistened with emotion.
I did too, until I couldn't anymore. Maybe it's my turn to remind you.
His voice was firm, but not imposing. Clara lowered her eyes, fiddling again with the shredded napkin. The silence stretched.
Daniel didn't press.
He knew pushing too hard would be like slamming the very door he wanted to open. So he gave her room to breathe.
The wall clock read nearly noon when the kitchen bell rang.
Clara stood up automatically, but Daniel noticed the hesitation, as if, for a moment, she had considered staying there, just listening. When she returned minutes later, she seemed calmer. She sat down across from him again, this time letting her arms rest on the table, as if surrendering.
You always show up at the wrong time, you know?
She said with a faint smile.
Or maybe the right time. I can't tell. Daniel smiled too. I like to think it's the second option.
She chuckled, but it was brief, as if she didn't dare let it last. I don't know what you're trying to do, Daniel.
But whatever it is. I'm not that rooftop girl anymore. I know.
He cut in softly.
But I also know that girl still lives inside you. She's just hidden. Clara fell silent, digesting his words.
Behind her tired eyes, a timid spark seemed to flicker. Daniel leaned back then, crossing his arms as if shifting his tone, less intimate now, more practical.
Tell me something, if you had a chance to start over, would you take it? She let out a nervous laugh, the kind you give when hearing a joke that isn't funny. Start over?
Daniel, I have debts, a brother I don't know where half the time, years lost.
You talk like it's simple.
He looked at her calmly, without blinking.
Sometimes, it can be.
Clara stayed still, studying his face, as if trying to figure out whether there was arrogance or only sincerity in his words.
And it was in that moment Daniel realized, the idea forming in his mind wasn't just a memory of gratitude. It was a real plan.
Something that could pull Clara out of this cafe and give her back the future she had always deserved.
But he wouldn't reveal everything at once. Not yet. He needed to plant the seed slowly, let her believe in herself again before believing in any promise. Clara was still absorbing Daniel's words when the doorbell jingled again.
The sound was sharper this time, breaking the calm that had settled between them. Two men walked in, bringing with them a rush of hot air and desert dust.
They weren't ordinary customers. They didn't carry the lightness of travelers or the urgency of truckers. They carried another weight, the hard look of men who weren't there for coffee. Daniel noticed immediately.
The leather jackets, despite the suffocating heat, spoke of calculated intent. One of them, tall and thin, bore a scar across his jaw. The other, shorter and broad-shouldered, chewed gum with a steady rhythm, every snap echoing through the cafe.
Clara froze.
The color drained from her face, and the napkin she had been tearing slipped from her hand.
Daniel didn't miss it. Do they come here often? He murmured, eyes fixed on the newcomers. Clara drew a breath, adjusted her apron, and forced a smile like a mask slipped on in seconds.
From time to time, she whispered before rising. He watched her walk to the counter, where the two men leaned as if the place already belonged to them. The broad one chewed his gum louder, looking at Clara with a crooked grin.
We came for some coffee, and something else, sweetheart.
Daniel couldn't hear her reply, but her body language said everything. Hunched shoulders, low voice, trembling hands. Clara seemed to shrink in front of them, and that lit something inside him, a silent anger, an indignation that refused to stay still. The scene dragged on for minutes that felt like hours. Clara served 2 cups, her hands steady only because she forced them to be. Then she leaned in, whispering quickly.
Daniel caught fragments. Miguel, time, 1 more week.
The man with the scar slammed his hand on the counter, the sound reverberating through the nearly empty diner. Clara flinched but kept her voice low, almost inaudible. The stocky one just laughed, spitting his gum into a napkin and replacing it with another. It was a laugh of contempt, the kind of laugh from men who knew they held control. Daniel rose slowly, as though only stretching his legs. He walked toward the dusty arcade machine against the wall, positioning himself close enough to catch more without looking like he was eavesdropping. "I told you, I'll take care of it." Clara's voice came out steady this time, but Daniel heard the strain beneath it. "Take care of it?" the scarred man repeated, leaning over the counter. "Miguel promised to take care of it. You're paying for his mistakes. And all we hear are excuses." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. Each word was a blow in the air. The bulky man grabbed the coffee cup, drained it in one gulp, then spat it back on the counter. "Bitter," he said, laughing loudly. "Just like your situation." Clara drew a deep breath, took the cup away without a word, and disappeared into the kitchen, maybe to regain her composure. The two men stayed at the counter, exchanging glances and muttering between themselves. That was when Daniel returned to his table, though his mind was already racing. The debt wasn't hers. It was Miguel's. Yet Clara was the one paying the price. And that couldn't go on. She came back moments later, face recomposed but eyes betraying the truth. She sat down across from Daniel again, avoiding his gaze. "They'll leave soon," she said, almost apologetically. "Don't worry about it." "They're not thinking about me, Clara," Daniel answered, his tone firm. "They're thinking about you." She tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow. "I know how to handle myself. I always have." "No, Clara." He leaned in, hands on the table. "You're surviving, not handling. That's different." Silence fell between them, heavy. She seemed ready to argue, but stopped herself. Deep down, she knew he was right. Daniel drew a breath. "Maybe it's time to stop putting out Miguel's fires, and start living your own life." Clara looked at him then, and in her eyes there was anger, pain, and hope all mixed together. As if she wanted to believe him, but feared trying. Daniel knew, now was the moment to plant the idea. The seed that could change everything. The two men still lingered at the counter, muttering and laughing harshly, when Daniel stood up from his table. He walked toward them with steady steps, unhurried, like someone used to having control without ever raising his voice. "Gentlemen," he said, polite but laced with authority. "I trust the coffee's to your liking." The bulky one with the gum looked him over, from the immaculate suit to the expensive watch, to the upright posture. "Who are you?" he asked, with the arrogance of a man who doesn't like being interrupted. Daniel smiled faintly, a smile that was neither provocation nor submission. Just someone who doesn't enjoy seeing a good person cornered in her own workplace. The scarred man narrowed his eyes. "This isn't your business, friend." Daniel kept calm, resting one arm on the counter like he owned the place. "That's fine. Then let's talk business, since that's what this is really about." His voice took on a professional tone, each word precise. "I imagine you're here because of Miguel, right?" A heavy silence fell. Behind the counter, Clara's eyes widened, silently begging him not to get involved. But it was too late. The scarred man leaned closer, his breath heavy with coffee and smoke. "The kid owes. And when someone owes, family pays." Daniel didn't blink. "I understand. Debts must be paid, of course. But it seems to me you're collecting from the wrong person." He gestured discreetly toward Clara. "She never owed you anything. You know that." "That doesn't matter," the stocky man replied. "What matters is that we get paid." Daniel tilted his head, lowering his tone until it was almost confidential. "Do you know who I am?" The two exchanged a quick, wary glance. "No," the scarred one said flatly. "Very well." Daniel adjusted his jacket. "Let's just say I have experience handling situations like this. I'm proposing a deal, You give me some time, and I'll settle this matter myself. Directly with Miguel, the way it should have been from the start.
Clara opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel raised his hand, asking for silence. The bulky one snorted.
And why should we trust you? Daniel held their gaze, steady, unshakable.
Because I never make promises I can't keep. And unlike Miguel, I keep mine. A long pause followed.
The men exchanged a look. At last, the scarred one stepped back.
1 week, he said, jabbing a finger into Daniel's chest.
After that, the conversation changes.
Daniel inclined his head, unfazed. 1 week is enough.
The two men finished their coffee hastily, tossed a few crumpled bills on the counter, and stormed out, the doorbell ringing loud behind them like a sigh of relief.
Clara sat in silence for several seconds, her face pale.
Then she turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fury.
What was that, Daniel?
Her voice trembled.
You don't know what you've just gotten yourself into.
He looked at her calmly, his words unshakable.
I know exactly what I've gotten into. And that's precisely why I won't let you carry this weight alone.
Clara lifted her hand to her face, trying to hide the tears that threatened to spill.
You don't understand, this isn't your problem. Clara.
Daniel's tone softened as he leaned closer.
Since when has looking out for the person who once believed in me stopped being my problem?
She closed her eyes, defeated. For the first time, the wall she had built around herself began to crack. And in that moment, Daniel realized it was time to show her that her life could take another path. Clara discreetly wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her apron, trying to regain her composure.
Daniel, patient, waited. He didn't rush. He let the silence settle, let her breathing return to normal.
Only then did he speak, his voice low and firm.
Clara, I know you don't want charity. And that's not what I'm offering.
He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers.
I'm talking about opportunity.
Her brow furrowed, suspicious.
Opportunity? What are you talking about?
I have offices in Santa Fe, he began, weighing each word.
One of them needs an administrative manager. Steady work, with training, good salary, benefits, and room to grow.
Clara stared at him as though he had spoken a foreign language.
You're joking, aren't you? She let out a humorless laugh. I serve coffee and take orders. And you think I could manage an office?
Daniel kept his tone serene.
I don't think. I'm certain.
She shook her head in disbelief.
You haven't seen me in 20 years. You don't know what I can or can't do anymore.
I know enough, he replied firmly.
I know you were the one who taught me discipline, the one who believed I could be something greater.
You've always been organized, focused, determined.
Time doesn't erase that. Clara dropped her gaze to the table, biting her lip. It sounds too good to be true.
It's not a gift, he said, leaning closer.
It's an investment.
In someone who already proved her worth to me once. Silence fell again, but it was different this time.
It wasn't heavy like before.
It was filled with possibilities. Clara seemed to wrestle with the disbelief that had become her shield. Her fingers drummed on the rim of her mug, keeping pace with the racing of her heart. Finally, she lifted her eyes.
And if I fail? Daniel smiled tenderly.
Then you fail trying.
But I doubt you will. Clara didn't answer right away.
She only breathed deeply, as if years of weight were lifting, even if just a little. It was the first step. And Daniel knew, sometimes, all someone needs is an open door to remember they can still walk through it.
Clara drew in another breath, still processing his offer. The silence wasn't rejection but reflection.
Daniel watched her patiently, knowing this wasn't just about a job. It was about reclaiming an identity she thought she had lost.
Then, suddenly, Clara gave a small, almost shy smile. Funny, you just reminded me of something I hadn't thought of in years. Daniel leaned forward. What?
The day we painted that abandoned wall near school. She chuckled softly.
Do you remember? Daniel blinked, surprised by the memory. How could I forget?
You showed up with paint cans borrowed from your neighbor, and I was sure we were going to end up arrested.
And you almost were. She teased, laughing.
When the principal walked around the corner, you dropped the can right on his foot.
I thought we'd get expelled.
But he didn't expel us, Daniel said with a smile. In the end, he looked at the drawing and said it was the first time that ugly wall had ever been useful. Clara sighed, her laughter softening into melancholy.
I painted a giant sun. And you wrote hope in crooked letters. I thought that wall would last forever. Daniel looked at her tenderly. And it did. At least in our memory. He paused.
That's the point, Clara.
You've always been the one to turn gray into color. You can't forget that.
She stared at the table for a few seconds, biting her lip. When she looked up, there was something new in her eyes. A mixture of fragility and courage.
You talk like I'm still capable of that.
Because you are, he replied firmly.
No matter how many years have passed. No matter what's happened. That Clara is still here.
She took a deep breath, her hand inching closer to his on the table, not quite touching, but close enough for him to feel the gesture.
And if I say yes,
her voice was low, almost a whisper, it wouldn't just be for me.
It would be for that girl who painted a sun on a wall and swore never to give up.
Daniel smiled, and in that instant, he knew the decision was almost made. He didn't need more promises, only the reminder of who they had always been. 3 months had passed since that morning in Silver Creek.
Luna's cafe was still there, with its flickering sign and worn-out booths. But for Clara Mendoza, that chapter was over. In Santa Fe, life had a different rhythm.
The city was vibrant, full of culture, street art, and colorful markets blending tradition with modernity. There, Clara discovered she could still smile for real, without forcing her lips.
That day, Daniel stepped quietly into the glass front building that housed one of his offices. The lobby bustled with employees moving in and out, meetings scheduled down hallways. He went up to the 3rd floor, guided more by curiosity than by his agenda.
And then he saw her. Clara sat behind a desk, headset on, her computer screen filled with spreadsheets.
Her posture was upright, confident.
Her hair fell loose over her shoulders, and her simple but elegant clothes made her seem like she had always belonged there. Her hands moved quickly, her eyes sharper, but above all, there was life in them. When she noticed him, she smiled. Not the tired smile from the cafe, nor the polite one for hurried customers. A full smile, the kind that lights up an entire face. Look who came to ruin my productivity, she teased, crossing her arms with mock seriousness.
Daniel laughed. Just came to see if you were still here.
She shrugged.
Where else would I be?
And this time, he believed every word. His heart warmed. There was Clara Mendoza, no longer the waitress weighed down by debts and shadows, but the woman who was slowly rediscovering the girl who once painted a sun on a wall and swore never to give up. As he left the building, Daniel breathed deeply, gazing up at the clear Santa Fe sky. He realized something simple yet powerful: sometimes, changing a life doesn't require miracles or endless wealth. It only takes reminding someone who they really are, opening a door, and saying, you can still walk through it.
And maybe, he thought, we all have someone like that in our lives.
Someone who just needs a reminder, a gesture, a chance to rise again. If this story touched you, share it with someone you believe still carries a hidden sun within. Sometimes the greatest difference we can make is simply to believe again in those who almost forgot their own worth.